Good morning, Francis.
Good morning, Katie.
Had a few follow-up questions from what I asked you the other day about the mind. Yeah, it kind of broke down my concept of the mind, or what I've been seeing as the mind. And I'm wondering if basically, like, there's not really a mind, there's just a series of thoughts, and we call it the mind. I'm wondering if seeing the mind as a concept that I believe in is the same as seeing a separate self that I believe in, or is it something different?
Say that again.
Like, is the belief in the concept of the mind the same as the belief in a separate self? Because the way I think I kind of identify a lot is with the mind. And so I started to wonder if it's the same as believing I'm an individual.
Can you lower, please? I have a feedback because you're not using things like that. You're using the speakers. So can you lower the volume on your computer?
Yeah, it's funny. I just realized I had my headphones in and then I forgot I didn't turn off the Bluetooth. So is that better?
Yeah, much better.
Can you hear me?
So, yeah, yes, perfect.
Okay, good. Sorry about that.
So there are several clarifications that are needed. The first one is the belief in a separate self. What does that mean? What does that mean? What is the self? Because we have to define with precision the terms of the expression, the belief in a separate self. And it hinges around the word self, which is another word for I or me or ego, whatever we want to call it, what we are, our real nature. So in my book, self means awareness, because that's what we know to be, because we say, I think, I perceive, I understand. So therefore, I or self is that, whatever that is, which thinks, perceives, understands, loves, beholds, etc. Okay, so that has to be well defined. In other words, it doesn't necessarily mean a human being. It doesn't necessarily mean a human body. You see, that's where the fine points of this definition, they come right away into the picture. When I say self is whatever it is, whatever it may be, which perceives, thinks, understands, loves, beholds, and that's what we know to be. That's our true nature. Now, I have to add one little more fine point to this definition. Because, and that's the adjective, real. Our real self. So the moment I add the adjective real to this definition, the definition becomes our real self is the reality that thinks, that perceives, that loves, that beholds, that understands. So then the reality. So to believe in the belief in a separate self. Now that we have defined self as the reality that perceives, the belief in a separate self means that we believe that the reality that perceives, beholds, etc., is separate and limited. Then we have to ask ourselves, what is... Please mute your phone and your mic unless you are interacting. The reality that perceives, what evidence do we have that it is limited or separate? So that's the root of the investigation. There are many things that we have good reason to not to believe or even to think that they are limited or separate. For instance, mind is limited. Why? Because my mind doesn't have access to your thoughts, meaning to your mind. Your mind doesn't have access to my mind. So obviously, mind is limited. And there are good reasons to believe that way. In other words, that minds are limited is not a belief. It's an experiential fact. That the body is limited, the human body, is also an experiential fact. In that sense, that my human body is not the body of the bird which is out there. Now, my human body is limited because it is not the body of the bird or the body of a tree which is out there. However, it doesn't mean it is separate. You see, that's a very interesting distinction. Limited is not the same thing as separate. So, the human body, the human mind are limited. And it is not a matter of belief, since it's a matter of experience. So the case is closed, if you will. Human body, human mind is limited. The case is open, however, regarding our self, as defined as the reality that perceives, also known as awareness. I define it as awareness in my book. But self and awareness in my book are synonyms. So now that we have clarified all of that, what is your question?
I think you answered my question. Yeah, I was thinking that limitation and separation were synonyms. Yeah. There's more coming. Just hold on a second. Yeah, this question spawned from. It was really eye-opening for me when you told me like the mind doesn't think. It's funny because I know you've said that before, but it struck me a little deeper. And they're your thoughts, like it's in your freedom. You're thinking these thoughts, they're yours. And I think I'd been looking at the mind as this kind of ugly, limited thing that was in my way. And yeah, and then I could kind of see the beauty and the usefulness of it. So, but it still, like you said, feels limited, and that's okay, is what you're saying.
Yes, I
doesn't mean it's separate.
Yeah, we can elaborate a little more about what is mind. And we have to make a distinction as mind as a concept or as a model, and mind as an experience. And mind as an experience.
Yeah.
Right? And what mind as a model is a model that the aim of which is to account for mind as an experience.
Mm-hmm.
So mind as an experience is whatever we as human beings phenomenally experience and have experienced throughout our life. And it is comprised simply of three elements: thoughts or representations I was going to say in the mind, such as when we dream or when we daydream or when imagination or just concepts. Thoughts, external sense perceptions, what we hear, what we see, what we taste, what we touch, and bodily sensation. That's it. So mind as an experience is comprised of this trinity, if you will. That's it. And now, models of mind, there are many. And each of them has some form of usefulness. However, the map is not the territory. The mind as a model is not the mind as an experience. And if we ask ourselves, what is it that truly matters? It's not the mind as a model. That which truly matters is the mind as an experience. And that's why here we are usually, since we are not into psychology or neuroscience, we are not really interested in mind as a model, no matter how interesting those various models may be. We are almost exclusively interested in mind as an experience, because that's which truly matters.
Right. It's funny you say that. I've been reading a pretty interesting book that's a theory of a model of mind. It's helpful for my studying, though. It's pretty good. But and so it's the mind that makes the model of itself.
Well, even when you say that, when you ask a question like this, you already implicitly have a model of mind. as mind being an agency who is able to create, or that is able to create. In particular, that has the ability to create a model of itself.
Right, and see itself, which is not true.
Yes, so that's why this distinction between mind as a reality of mind is so important.
I got it. And then can you talk a little bit about the relationship between mind or thought? I think it's more thought and belief systems, or just beliefs that we hold.
Well, first we have to be very precise to clarify what we mean by belief.
I'm thinking.
No. Let me clarify it.
Okay.
There are two categories of beliefs. There are beliefs that are, at least in part, substantiated or supported by factual evidence. Okay? And there are beliefs that are absolutely unsupported by factual evidence. So let me take three examples. One, I believe there is gravity on the surface of the earth. It is a belief, yes, and I have to confess, I believe in gravity. I have to confess, because my bottom is sitting on the chair right now and I'm not levitating. So that is one kind of belief. But this kind of belief is almost the same thing as a fact, right?
Yeah.
Because that is not completely a fact, not complete. Now, let's take a different kind of belief. I believe in Santa Claus. Why? Because I've met Santa Claus. My mom and my dad took me to Macy's, and I had my picture taken on Santa Claus' lap. So that's a belief I have, and there is some supporting evidence, right? My picture on Santa Claus' lap. Now, this kind of belief, of course, once I investigate a little further the evidence, I discover the evidence is bogus. And then the belief becomes a true belief in Francis' book, meaning a belief which is absolutely not supported by evidence. Right? In other words, there are beliefs that are for which there is evidence, but this evidence is not that solid, and there is a possibility that this evidence will be proven wrong. And then finally, there is the extreme kind of belief. It is a belief for which there is zero supporting evidence, and in spite of this total absence of evidence, I still believe. It would be tantamount to, going back to the Santa Claus example, the reality of Santa Claus having been completely debunked. The picture of me on Santa Claus laps having been completely debunked by my parents, taking me back to Macy's. I see Santa Claus. Then I follow Santa Claus when he goes to the locker room, takes off his red costume and turns out to be some kind of panhandler with a beard and with, stinky and right? In spite of that, in spite of the only evidence I had have been completely debunked because I'm so attached to the concept of Santa Claus, I still believe in Santa Claus. Okay? So that's the third kind of belief. So you have two extremes, one gravity, and the other one debunked Santa Claus. And I still believe in it. So it is this third type of belief that in my book I call belief. In other words, it's a belief which is absolutely unsupported by evidence. All evidence that was brought forward in support of this belief has been debunked. And I am absolutely convinced, 100% convinced, that there is no evidence. In spite of that, we are still believing. You see? So
Yes.
that's what I call religious belief, or something of that sort, in which there is not a single shred of evidence.
Yes, those are the kind of beliefs I'm referring to as well. And the reason I was asking about the relationship with mind is because it seems like as some of these beliefs are kind of buried. Maybe I adopted them when I was really young or something. And as they come to the surface, I'm like aware, like you said, I see it's not Santa Claus, but I still go along with it. So I'm wondering, like, is that, what's the connection with mind, if any? And I don't know. I feel like there's something there. I'm not sure.
Yeah, because the belief of that sort is very different from a thought. It is a thought, a concept, but there is something added to it. It's a validation of this concept as being true. One thing is the concept of Santa Claus or the concept of a unicorn. Another thing is the validation of it by saying unicorns exist or Santa Claus exists. You see? In the absence of evidence supporting such existence, it's a free country, if you will. Yes, it's an act of freedom. Religious belief is an act of freedom. It comes out of our freedom. But that's it, that's about it. In other words, it is not something which is imposed onto us. We are free. It's not like gravity. We are not free to believe that there is no gravity. We don't have that freedom because experience compels us to believe that there is gravity on the surface of the earth. So it's very different when there is no supporting evidence. Then it's our freedom. So now the connection of all these clarifications with that which we are really talking about here is the connection with awareness or self. And it has to do with the usual belief that awareness or self, as we have defined it, is limited or separate. Now, these beliefs that self is limited or separate, we need them to try to put it in one of the three categories of beliefs that I have just mentioned. In ignorance, we put it in the category of gravity. then on the path to truth is going to belong to the Santa Claus category. But still, we believe in Santa Claus. But then we have glimpses that Santa Claus doesn't really exist. So we oscillate between putting it in the category of unicorns or in the category of an existing Santa Claus, if you. And at the end of the journey, it's definitely in the category of unicorn, of pure belief without any supporting evidence. In other words, if we believe it to be the case, it's just our freedom. And therefore, if as a result of this belief, we suffer, it's because we want to suffer.
Right.
It's not a suffering which is imposed onto us. It is a suffering that we choose.
Yes, I see that's true. So there's this foundational belief that we're, of ignorance. And then is it true that we create, there's like little bubbles of beliefs around it. Like, I just had this image, like to try and keep us in the cage. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, is it worth looking at the little beliefs that kind of surround that foundational, most important belief that we need to debunk? Is it worth like popping those bubbles, or should we just go straight for the big one?
Well, if you have a bubble that bothers you, you have to investigate it.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
You have to burst it open so that
Okay.
it disappears. You have to go with the needle of your discrimination. You put the needle in the bubble disappears.
Okay. And this happens with understanding.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I see it happening. Thank you.
You're welcome.